Thank you so much again, Chair Harrington, for the opportunity to provide you and the board with the quarterly update, which is part of the equity resolution that you passed in 2020. So coming up on 2 years of the benefit of that leadership from you and the board. What's really exciting to me about this presentation this evening is that this is the first cycle around the sun that we have made in terms of our quarterly reports. So this is our 4th quarterly report. And you'll see in the ways that we've been reporting out that we're now transitioning from providing quarterly updates to now being able to provide more annual updates in terms of the data that we're paying attention to in our work related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I just want to note that I am joined this evening by Amanda Garcia-Snell, our Community Engagement Manager, and she'll be sharing updates specific to the work of the Community Engagement team. So next slide. There are some slides that are going to be repetitive. I try to build them into the quarterly report because I think it's so important to just remind ourselves of the context that we're operating within. And as I have said multiple times, to achieve equity in outcomes that we're trying to achieve as a county, we have to be familiar with the roots and the causes of inequity. And so we need to center ourselves within the long arc of history. And as we enter into Black History Month, it is important to reflect on the fact that Black history is actually human history. It is our collective history, and it predates the notion of nation, race, and tribe. The myth of white supremacy that we are operating under and working to dismantle is actually a relatively new concept. When we look at history with this kind of expansive view, it emerged in the 1400s after thousands and thousands of years without divisions based on race. And what's hopeful for me about thinking about history like this is that when we think about this, we can begin to envision a time when we look back on white supremacy in the same way we think about theories like the earth being flat or at the center of the solar system. And together we can dismantle it through our efforts to recognize the important diverse contributions of all cultures and start to think about equitable, sustainable practices more holistically. Next slide. So again, just wanting to ground ourselves as well in a change management curve. So here we are again, stepping away. We're in the very early stages. Again, this is our 4th quarter, so we're 1 year in to talking about how we're implementing equity across all of our work, and we are moving away from a status quo, which has generally been more race neutral. We don't tend to talk about racial equity or the implications of how different policies play out in different communities. And so again, we're learning new behaviors, learning new language, and trying new processes as a county. And that takes time, and it has impacts on our productivity and trying to do new things and learn new things and integrate that into the way that we operate. So it's going to take some time for it to feel normal. So if the questions that folks are asking, especially on the board, are really important questions, and we want to share our appreciation that those get raised here and also in individual conversations, because we're all on this learning journey together. The next slide actually gives us an opportunity to reflect on all the great things that have happened across the county over the past almost 2 years. Again, as I mentioned, we're almost 2 years away from the adoption of the equity resolution in February of 2020. And following the adoption, you all voted to fund the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement, and to combine it with the community engagement team that already existed. I started in September 2020. Just today, I said I started in 2021, so it's COVID timeline. So it's really helpful to ground us in the fact and actual time. About a year ago, so February 2021, we launched the Equity Leadership Council, which was one of the pillars of the equity resolution. And the Equity Leadership Council committees started soon after that in April. There are 6 of them, and we'll focus a little bit more on the work that they're grappling with. And then last August, you adopted the Equity Action Plan, Strategic Action Plan. And we also launched an advisory council to help think about how to co-create the Advisory Council on Racial Equity. So that notion of co-creation and partnership with community is something that we've been really leaning into. This fall, we launched the budget equity tool. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that is a really significant example of how we're leaning into the equity resolution that talks about equity in all of the county's policies, programs, and practices. And we anticipate looking forward that we'll be launching that Advisory Council on Racial Equity, which is external. It will be populated with community experts in areas of equity, diversity, and inclusion across multiple disciplines. And we're really looking forward to bringing them into our equity journey in an intentional way. Next slide, please. So again, and just want to share my personal philosophy for how to manage the change work that we're doing. The county has had many champions for equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so we're really building on that good work and trying to launch it into the sphere of great equity, diversity, and inclusion work. And that really happens through in my mind, through 3 areas of focus: disciplined people, disciplined thought, and disciplined action. And so we'll share about how we've been staffing up, mention the structures that we're building, which really brings in more equity champions and deepens their capacity, knowledge base, both in the areas of equity, diversity, and inclusion, but also how we apply it to our work across the county. Disciplined thought is about how we look at our current practices and look at how we can turn what we're currently doing into best practices. So identifying the gaps between what is best practice and what are we doing now, what does the data say? And then discipline action is how we start to close those gaps between what we know we can or should be doing and honing in on where the data shows that we have gaps in access and outcomes of our services. Next slide. So here I'm going to pivot and turn it over to Amanda Garcia-Snell to do a little bit of a deeper dive around our community engagement activities, which is also about engaging broader and broader groups of people into the work that we do as a county to help inform our work and make sure that it's responsive to our diverse Washington County community. So, Amanda.
Thanks, Latricia. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. As Latricia mentioned, I'm Amanda Garcia-Snell, Community Engagement Manager, and I'm here to just provide some of the community engagement portion of this quarterly update. Next slide, please. So hopefully this graphic is familiar to you. It's intended to illustrate the many touch points that exist for community to provide input to you all and the county as an organization. While I won't read all of these, I do want to highlight that in addition to our formal boards and commissions and informal work groups, we also have internal work groups like the Cultural Heritage Celebration groups, like the Black History Month Committee that you just heard from some of those folks today. And those those cultural heritage celebration committees, they really provide opportunities for us to identify and connect with community partners and grow those relationships. We're able to make opportunities for community to interface with you all in reading proclamations or presentations, sharing presentations or remarks. And we really use these opportunities as a tool for deeper engagement and occasionally and potentially policy change, as we saw with Juneteenth and with the land acknowledgement. And so they are one piece of our work, but just one that we haven't really talked about much in the past. Next slide, please. So this slide is similar to previous information that I'd shared in the past, but it's a little different arrangement, and it shows annual participation in CPO meetings and board engagement events. So the blue bars are the CPO meetings and the orange bars are the board engagement events in which the community engagement program was involved. So the numbers and each little section here represents a year. So 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. The numbers at the top are the numbers of events themselves. And then at the bottom in smaller type, you can see the total number of participants in a year. So in some instances, you'll notice the blue bar for 2021, it has a smaller number at the top than other years, but it's a higher bar. And that's because there were fewer events, but more people participating in them overall. Next slide, please. So as you recall, we've been working on demographic data improvement for boards and commissions, and I am very excited to report that we have had significant improvement in this particular area. Prior to 2021, only 13% of applicants provided demographic data, and now we're up to an average of 90.4% of applicants provide demographic data. So that's really helpful in bringing appointments to you all and thinking about the diversity of our boards and commissions in general. Next slide, please. So this is an annual version of a table that I typically show with quarterly comparisons, and this is more of an annual comparison, so pre-2021 and then 2021. You can see in 2021, primarily because we had so many more people providing demographic data, we had good distribution across age categories, even people born in the 1990s, which I think is very exciting to have participation from younger people in our boards and commissions. And then we also see representation across racial and ethnic categories. Of course, there's still a lot of work to do to encourage people to share their demographic data. You can see that we didn't have as many people sharing data in some of those categories. But that data is so important, so important to us because of how we can see how our representation on boards and commissions reflects the county demographics. So next slide. So we are continuing to work on foundational changes, or what I call foundational changes, such as the CPO revisioning that I brought to you in December, and our planned efforts there to align that work with other countywide engagement work. And then also boards and commissions is a primary focus of our work. And so still working to increase the diversity and support inclusion. We're also starting to work on a compensation policy so that we can compensate our community members for their contributions of time and experience and expertise that they provide to our work, and helps us serve the community better. We're also starting our work on land acknowledgement implementation plan, which I also shared with you a few meetings ago. I want to say this is December, but I guess it was earlier January. But really starting to pull together staff across the organization, boards and commissions related staff, and then fully intend to engage staff from the whole organization so that we can really be thoughtful in developing a plan that that works for people and is meaningful. Next slide. So for civic leaders, we've had 122 unique graduates to date. You'll see the number of people who completed for each year, who completed the cohorts for each year, are that larger number in each of those arrows. If you add those up, you'll see that it comes to 144, not 122. And that's because in the The first virtual cohort that we offered at the beginning, in the early days of the pandemic, was only offered to alumni, not new participants, because we were new to providing virtual engagement. So as Adelante Mujeres, our partner in this work, and we really didn't know how people would respond to that. And so we really wanted to only offer that to people who were familiar with the project and some of the expectations. We did a deeper dive for that first virtual cohort. Since then, our team and Adelante are old hands at virtual engagement. And so all of the cohorts since that cohort in 2020 have been virtual. We plan to launch the RFPQ for additional civic leadership trainers in February. And some examples of programming changes that we'll be looking for, which is largely based on the extensive data that we have garnered from Adelante's evaluations of these programs from participants and other community, is to offer things like shorter bootcamp style sessions or sessions focused on specific topics like public safety or budget or boards and commissions. Those are all areas where people have expressed a lot of interest, learning more about how to engage with the county and government in general around some of those areas. Next slide. So the last thing that I want to share with you is our weekly e-update or electronic update that we launched last October. It's a weekly digital communication that's really geared towards community-based organizations so that they can share opportunities with their networks and with the people that they serve. We include county opportunities and also those that other organizations and jurisdictions share with us. We're really trying to focus on opportunities for people to impact decision-making that may affect them, but sometimes we put in other emergent information. Our last week issue included some information around COVID tests, things like that, that it would be helpful to share in multiple ways. If you would like to receive it, and I know that, that some of you are, but if you would like to receive it and you're not, let me know and we're happy to sign you up. It's a constant contact opportunities. You can share it with other people. They can subscribe as well. And that is all for my community engagement portion, much shorter than typically, but one slice of the pie for the work that we're doing. And I will hand it back over to Latricia.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks to the community engagement team for the great work that is happening. And it's just been wonderful to see how the quality just continues to increase over time. So it's very exciting work. So I'm going to pivot now to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so the next slide is just a reminder of the structure within the internal focused Equity Leadership Council. Again, it's focused on development and implementation of our equity, diversity, and inclusion strategies, standards, policies, and tools. And it's based on both best equity, diversity, and inclusion practices, as well as emerging best practices. It's a fairly young field. And so some of the work we're basing off of other jurisdictions, and some of it's fairly novel, and we're learning as we go. But since we are now approaching the 1 year of the launch of our the council and our committees, and we've had a structure change with Design the Future and now the new structure with the assistant county administrators, we are looking at how we can update the charter for the Equity Leadership Council, and also thinking about how we adjust the meeting cadence for the committees within the Equity Leadership Council. The committees, as you'll recall, there are 6 of them focused on the major pillars, I believe, of robust equity, diversity, and inclusion practice within a government jurisdiction. So the committees are focused on civil rights compliance, diversity and inclusion within our boards and committees, diversity and inclusion of our employee base and our suppliers and contractors, equity, diversity and inclusion training, and then building out robust capacity for integrating and utilizing data with an equity lens, as well as building out equity policy. The next slide is a highlight of some of the forthcoming policy work. And we're currently working out what policy work can be adopted and implemented internal to the county administrative office and structure, and what policy will be coming forward to the board. So more on that, but the major pieces of policy work that we're really excited about coming forward is adoption of employee resource group permissive policy. So that would allow employees who are underrepresented within our workforce to self-organize and be a support not only for the employee base, but also help inform organizational policy and practice to make our workforce, our workplace more welcoming and improve our retention of diversity. So it's not enough just to recruit diversity in our workforce. We really need to think about what it's going to take to retain a diverse workforce as well. And we'll also be updating the bilingual pay policy, and that's the compensation benefit that exists currently for employees who utilize their bilingual skills. As Amanda mentioned, we'll be bringing forward an equitable community engagement policy, and that aligns not just with the work of the boards and commissions, but also all the various ways that we're doing community engagement. Like you all heard earlier today, that work happening with MISTIP and community engagement there, as well as with all the community engagement efforts that you'll be hearing about around our ARPA investments. We are, as I mentioned, launching the budget equity tool. I'll speak a little bit more to that in a minute. And then what we're looking forward to going forward is applying the learnings from the utilization of a budget equity tool to legislative equity tool. So this will align with statewide efforts to build equity analysis into legislation. And it will exist as a support to you as a board as you consider your legislative agenda going forward, and also for staff as staff are developing legislative concepts for consideration, as well as tracking or responding to legislation moving forward at the state and federal level. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to spend a minute to talk a little bit about the work of establishing a new equity tool within a county-wide process. So you all are very well aware that the budget is the county's annual significant policy document, and it's there are many hands that contribute to the budget that you ultimately adopt. And so we're building in the consideration of equity throughout the budget building process. And the creation of the budget equity tool was led by our equity policy manager, Ashley Horn, built off of other jurisdictions who have been utilizing a budget equity tool, and then vetted, refined by our equity policy committee of the Equity Leadership Council. And then once we had a tool, then we needed to lean into staff training, and we offered 3 staff trainings. So all budget folks who touch the budget have been trained in the budget equity tool. And then we've been doing Q&A sessions and individual consults. So it's a lot of time. It's a really significant effort. And we are looking forward to learning from this first time through the process. So it's very much about a learning journey and seeing how the various org units within various departments apply the budget equity tool. So we're excited to deploy this as a baseline learning opportunity to see how departments are already investing in equity, and identifying the ways that they can contribute and continue to invest and build out their equity approaches through ongoing budget development. And then we will also, as the budget cycle goes forward, we will be bringing the budget equity tool training to you, as well as the budget committees, because as you'll recall, the genesis of all of this came from the budget committees last year, asking how do we embed equity into our budgetary deliberations. So that that will come back around to the committees, and you will have the opportunity to also consider equity using the same budget equity tool as you deliberate and move forward to the final adoption of the county's budget for fiscal year 22-23. And then we will continue to learn and refine that tool going forward. Next slide, please. I'm going to pause. I just want to take a breath there because it is so much work, and we're so appreciative of all the hands that have been a part of that effort. As we move forward, some of the other areas that we'll be looking into will be an equity data assessment, which is an area that you all approved funding for through the American Recovery Plan Act funds that came to Washington County. We're hoping that that assessment will launch before the end of this fiscal year, so late spring. But that is a significant assessment of our data systems and infrastructure, looking at how we collect demographic data, and then how we can utilize that demographic data to start developing snapshots of where we can see inequity in our systems, both in access to services, quality of services, and outcomes. So very excited about that. And then we'll be launching an equity, diversity, and inclusion request for qualified trainers, because there's so much interest and desire for equity training going forward. Next slide, please. We just wanted to appreciate the various community partners who helped us think through the Advisory Council for Racial Equity, which you'll be hearing more about later this spring. And wanted to just focus in on the importance of that co-creation and bringing community partners who have not just deep expertise in equity, but also they've been engaged in many, many advisory committees to help us frame the conversation, questions, priorities, and structure for that advisory council. So you'll hear more about that in the months to come. All right, next slide. Okay, so I wanted to just spend a little bit of time, because I know this is also a significant priority for the board. Procurement equity is something that we have been really appreciative of having Kitty Kong focus on within our team. And these are some of the data points that we've been tracking, and that is the number of contracts that we have entered into, and compare it to the number of contracts that we have entered into with COVID suppliers. One of the challenges that we are identifying as we continue to focus in on metrics and outcomes as it relates to supplier diversity is that we have a system that is not as nimble or as comprehensive as we would like as it relates to being able to track our COVID suppliers. So one challenge is that our nonprofits that we do quite a lot of contracting with for service delivery, they are not considered COVID suppliers, so they're not tracked. And we may be doing business with suppliers that are either small or women-owned or minority-owned, but if they're not certified, they're not captured. And then some of these may have been certified as COVID suppliers at one point, but aren't anymore. And so there are just a number of moving parts and pieces to track, but we're continuing to hone in on the best and most useful way to be able to report out on the progress that we're making towards supplier diversity. Next slide, please. This is one of the ways that we're trying to track the effectiveness. So it's not just the amount of suppliers that we have in our system, but it's also the number of contracts and the percentage of dollars that we're seeing moving out into the supplier diversity community, as well as what does that dollar amount represent as a percentage of our spend. So back in July, we shared that our spend on COVID suppliers was about 3% of our overall budget, but as more of our budget has rolled out into the community of suppliers, we see that percentage of spend go down, even though the number of dollars moving out to COVID suppliers is going up. Next slide, please. So we are building out a system an ecosystem that will be more supportive of procurement equity. And we appreciate that you, I believe just last week, adopted a set of procurement rule updates that include a significant focus on supplier diversity. So we'll be taking those rule updates and creating more training and information for individuals across the county who are doing contracting and procurement to support that work and reinforce that work. I want to appreciate you for the work that you did in November to adopt the Construction Career Pathways project and our partners at Metro, from whom we learned quite a lot. And then a lot of our focus going forward in terms of that relationship building is supplier diversity focused community engagement. So this means establishing memberships with certain organizations like OWAMI, the Oregon Association of Minority Entrepreneurs, and participating in their virtual trade show, as well as networking with the Certification Office for Business Inclusion and Diversity, which is the state certification for supplier diversity. Next slide, please. So this is another way that we're wanting to represent and track supplier diversity. So this is a little bit more granular at this point because we haven't gone all the way around a year of tracking supplier diversity since Kitty joined us midway through the year. And once we get through a year of kind of tracking it more closely, hopefully we'll have a better sense of the metrics that will be helpful going forward. Again, this is just one. You can see that OpenGov, which used to be Procure Now, that's our solicitation site for suppliers. And we're trying to get more vendors get registered and helping support them with that and sharing solicitations. So we have 222 new suppliers that have registered since July 1st. There's now almost 1,000 total suppliers registered on OpenGov. And of that, about just shy of 300 are certified minority women and emerging small businesses. And you can see in this pie chart, they break it out. So you can see how many small businesses, that's in green, and how many minority businesses, et cetera, with a level of granularity that I haven't seen before. So it's nice to see that we're tracking LGBTQ owned businesses, Native American owned businesses, veteran owned businesses, et cetera. And then there are several nonprofits that are also registered within OpenGov as well. So we'll be continuing to track and refine that as we move forward. Next slide, please. So as I pivot toward closing, I wanted to really take some time out to just share the appreciation that we have as the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement for some of the really important partnerships that we've been able to develop over the past year. We're very excited to be working with HR, our Human Resources team. They're also in a significant change process, and we're happy to walk forward with them in the process. We are working with the talent acquisition team to launch a bid process to support their learning of diversity and inclusion best practices, looking at their whole talent acquisition process to build out best practice strategy for that team. As I mentioned before, we're going to be launching an equity, diversity, and training request for qualified trainers. We're doing that in partnership with Brianna Jackson, the Learning and Development Manager, who you heard from earlier this evening. We're in day 14 or 15 of our 21-day racial equity habit building challenge, which began, the genesis of that was a way to think about how we can support employees who are isolating or quarantining at home as a result of COVID. So that idea, the genesis came out of a partnership conversation with HR. And then we're also working with the HR business senior business partners around improving our policy and procedure as it relates to assuring a discrimination and harassment-free workplace. So we're very excited about that. Next slide, please. And I know you've heard from the sheriff, as you've talked about the ESPD levy, about our partnership with the sheriff's office, but I also wanted to highlight that we partnered with the sheriff's office to complete a discrimination and harassment-free workplace policy all staff training. We trained, or not we, Sean Hartfield, our civil rights coordinator, trained all of the sheriff's office staff, mostly in person, using COVID safe protocols, but recognizing that the sheriff's operation is a 24/7 operation that required a lot of creative scheduling. And we very much appreciated the partnership. And I know Sean very much appreciated seeing the sheriff and senior leaders from the sheriff's office also in that training. We've been working with equity, diversity, and inclusion trainers within the sheriff's office to help them move their training forward. And then we've been partnering with our HR team, as well as some senior leaders within the sheriff's office to help build out equity, diversity, and inclusion assessments in the sheriff's office hiring and promotion processes. So quite a bit of work. The next slide, just want to highlight, again, as you heard today, the partnership with Land Use and Transportation, helping to build out equitable community engagement and equity metrics in the major transportation efforts that are, and middle housing efforts that are being led through Land Use and Transportation. And then also appreciating them for really being the genesis of our, and the Planning Commission for being the genesis of our land acknowledgement resolution and order. It was probably always in the plan, but the expedited timeline definitely came out of the leadership of individuals within the Planning Commission. So we appreciate that community leadership. In housing, as you know, we have 2 staff who are supervised within the Office of Equity and Inclusion and Community Engagement, but work 100% on supportive housing services, Ty Schwefferman and Janine Smith. You've met both of them in some of the presentations to the board. And our partnership with them has included making sure that equity is a component of shelter siting and community engagement, and as well as provider engagement for supportive housing services. And then we continue to work with the Latino Policy Council to think about how we can mitigate some of the impacts of the siting of the bridge shelter on Caellias. and we'll have more to report out on that in the coming months. But it's been quite a wonderful partnership with the Latino Policy Council and the City of Hillsborough, and really kind of building out this multi-jurisdictional and community-based partnership approach. Next slide, and this is my last slide, and then I'll turn it over to you for any questions or comments. Wanting to acknowledge how much work has happened over the past year and a half that I've been here, and 2 years since the equity resolution as it relates to COVID, and knowing that the county has always had a value and priority of centering equity and thinking about the inequitable impacts of COVID on our community. So looking forward, we're really excited to think about how we continue to support the county, but also other jurisdictions, and think in centering equity in the ways that we allocate the ARPA funding. One of the major ways that it's nice to work with Amanda, and also in partnership with the City of Hillsborough and the City of Beaverton, as well as our internal ARPA team, to focus on how do we engage regionally with culturally specific community partners to help inform both our Tranche 1 implementation of our investments, and also thinking about how we make our Tranche 2 investments. And so the partners that we've engaged, as I mentioned, City of Hillsborough, City of Beaverton, we're working internally with our economic development lead, Matt Craigie, and he's kind of bridging that conversation to the other jurisdictions, economic development leaders, really enjoying the partnership with public health. You'll hear more about that. And then really lifting up and centering the COVID Racial Equity Advisory Group, which grew out of public health's investment in culturally specific service delivery, but created a forum where there was an opportunity for more two-direction conversation about how we as a county can be more responsive to community needs. So we will be talking with the board more regarding ARPA and community engagement coming up on February 1st. So we're looking forward to that conversation. So clearly a lot of work has happened over this past year, and as we continue to build out the foundation on equity, we're also wanting to be more thoughtful about the cadence of the work that we take on, both because we are moving through a significant change process, and that change process is happening concurrently with a very persistent global pandemic. So really, again, wanting to center the health and the wellness of our workforce, as well as we center on equitable outcomes for our community. So with that, I'll stop and open it up to you for questions and any feedback you have for us.
Commissioners, questions and comments? Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Well, Latricia, you were right. That was a lot of information, and you and Amanda did a great job. So kudos to that. Things that kind of piqued my interest that that I will do a little bit more homework and then circle back with you on is I need to have a better understanding of what the budget equity tool really looks like and where we're going with all of that. So I'll be talking to you about that. Amanda, I'm looking forward to my CPOs getting fired back up again. So let's try and get that going, I guess, out in my district. But overall, I was really impressed, not only just with the overall presentation, but the data that you've been able to gather. I mean, Latricia, you and I talked about early on the importance of finding a data analyst that would be able to compile some of this information and extract it, I guess, from all of the bowels of what the county's been doing for years and not doing. And and it looks like you've got a great start on that. So, so thank you for doing that. It's hard to compare. I know it's hard to compare. When we looked at, you looked at that one percentage where we were 2.93% or something on one, and then later we were significantly lower. Those are hard comparisons to make. We'll have to have a little bit longer runway to really come up with that, but it's a great start. So, wow, thank you for all your hard work that not only do you do every day, but putting together this presentation. So great job, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And we could not do it without the whole team. So we really appreciate them. We have the easy job of reporting it out to you, and they grind it out every day.
Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
All I can say is, wow. It's stunning the amount of work that's been done and the degree to which, you know, I look back to our discussions around the resolution and all the meetings that we had to really solidify our thoughts around the resolution. And here it is, live and in person. You know, and that's my response is, you know, I just appreciate it. I appreciate all the work that you've done, Latricia, all the work that the staff has done. And I know that there's lots more to do. I understand that. But like I said, I'm just going to say, wow.
Thank you.
All righty. Well, seeing no other commissioner comments, I'll close with what a tremendous foundation that has been built here. Significant foundation over these last 2 years since we adopted the equity resolution. It's really a new day here at Washington County, and a needed one, as our Census 2020 information reflects the ever-changing face of the Washington County community. And since we are a service providing agency, we are on the necessary yet powerful journey to succeed as an exemplary organization to serve our diverse community and to foster the careers of a more diverse workforce that reflects our community. So I am grateful for the commitment of our board over these last 2 years to act on that equity resolution, to invest in ourselves as well as in our community. And together, we will have brighter days ahead. So thank you very much for this terrific presentation, and keep up the great work.
Thanks, Chair Harrington.
Thank you.